Good morning. Can everyone see me? Olivera, do you see me? Olivera.
Yes, I do. I'm fine, yes.
Do you see me on my
Yes.
screen? Great. I just wanted to check. Hello, everyone. My name is Daglas Grifin of Albany Associates, and welcome to our webinar on the challenges in moderating online comments in periods of crises. Let me start with an important instruction to make sure everyone can understand from the beginning how they can best participate. For those who need simultaneous interpretation into Montenegrin, please go to the bottom of your screen and select the interpretation icon in the menu at the bottom of your screen and choose French. Olivera, I'm going to have you please repeat that in Montenegrin for me so that people can start seeing or hearing the Montenegrin version as soon as possible.
I'll do that.
Yes, please.
Can you hear me? Because I just want to be sure that I'm unmuted. So,
yes.
In Montenegrin, dobar dan I dobrodošli na seminar Izazovi u moderiranju online komentarima u periodu kriza. Mala instrukcija vezano za način prevođenja na početku. Dakle, u donjem dijelu ekrana imate izbor opcija interpretation, prevod. Imate engleski i francuski. Znači, da biste čuli prevod na crnogorski jezik, kliknite na francuski i onda čujete prevodioce. Eto, to je jedna mala instrukcija za način komunikacije, odnosno za prevođenje. Hvala još jednom što ste.
Thank you, Olivera. Olivera is with the Montenegro Media Institute, and she's one of the partners, as I'll mention in a minute. So, sorry for the confusing language label. You have to choose the label French for interpretation because Zoom has only identified 8 languages for labeling interpretation. And I selected French randomly from this short list, but don't worry, you will be hearing Montenegrin. And for those of you who do not want to hear English in the background of the translation, please select mute original audio from the same menu, and you will hear only the translated or only the interpreted version. This channel that is marked French will give you interpretation into both languages, so it will go both ways. So the interpreters will translate from English to Montenegrin in that channel and also from Montenegrin into English simultaneously. This webinar is brought to you by the Montenegro Media Institute, the Association of Professional Journalists in Montenegro, the Mediacentrom Sarajevo, and Albany Associates in the UK, and it is supported by the British Embassy in Podgorici. The webinar focuses on the context in Montenegro, where the onset of COVID-19 has highlighted problems with online comments on media outlets in general. And this includes the spread of false information through online comments, the publication of personal details, so perhaps the details of someone who is suspected of having COVID-19 or other personal details that are potentially dangerous to expose, and also the potential threat of government intervention to address this situation. These pose challenges to media organizations that are operating in the country, but these are challenges that have been seen around the world. Online comments has been something that has really been discussed in legal circles and with media outlets for quite some time. And we are very lucky to have with us Džil Filips, who is the Director of Editorial Legal Services for The Gardijan. And she will discuss how The Gardijan addresses this thorny issue. We're very fortunate to have Jill with us today because she really understands the practicalities of online moderation for a very respected and global media outlets such as the Gardijan. And she has also trained on legal issues in the Western Balkans in the past. She's trained lawyers and she's worked with journalists there, including in Montenegro. So she has an understanding of the context and a real appreciation for the environment. Jill will speak for about 35 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions for 20 minutes before she has to leave the webinar for work commitments. And then we will have Mila Radulovic of the Journalists Association, who will give a brief overview of how this all fits into the Montenegrin context and various legal issues in the country. And you will be able to ask Mila questions as well. And if we have time for additional questions after that, I am also a media lawyer who's worked on these issues globally, and we can take some more questions before we wrap up the webinar by 11:30 Montenegrin time. And before turning over to Jill, I just wanted to address a few housekeeping points in addition to the translation. The webinar will be recorded and we will post it on YouTube, and we will publicize and distribute this link so that the webinar can serve as a reference for the future. This is so that people who were not able to attend today can take advantage of it, but we do have a lot of participants today. We have over 80 registered, and I see there are at least 60 or 70 online right now. And for any questions that you have during the webinar, at the bottom of your screen, next to the interpretation icon, there is a Q&A icon for questions and answers. This allows you to submit in either English or Montenegrin written questions. And all of us panelists can see those. And you can do this at any time during the webinar. You do not have to wait until the very end. And we will select a few of those to ask both Jill and then also to ask Mila and ask at the end as we're wrapping up the session. And we will group them into, we'll ask the questions that seem to come up the most often. And we will also do the, and group them together in the interest of time. At the end of this, also, you will receive an email that will include a short survey that asks your general impressions of the webinar and asks for recommendations on other themes that you might want to receive. I will note that this is our pilot webinar on this, and so please bear with us, the technical issues, but we are trying this out with interpretation for the first time, and we think we've got it down. But we would love to hear your suggestions at the end. So now I'm going to head and turn over to Jill, who has a presentation for us. So please, Jill, go right ahead.
Thanks very much. And good morning, everyone, from a very wet, miserable London, England. I remember when I was in Montenegro, it was anything but wet. It was very glorious. So I'm going to now share my screen and talk through some slides, and if there are any issues with hearing me or anything, Doug's going to let me know. So I'm going to go through to here, and hopefully everyone can now see the slides. And I'm also going to put some headphones on and talk through the microphone, so hopefully that's all reasonably clear for everyone. So comments are a really interesting area, and they've definitely come to the fore, not just recently, but in the last few years, because of concerns over harassment and online trolling. And most media organizations, particularly like The Guardian, recognize that there's a big commercial value in comments. Comments are seen to drive traffic, so people want to have comments, but they come at a bit of a cost sometimes. And while there are lots of plus points for comments, they contribute to debate and knowledge. People can point out errors, and they can add links, and they can vastly increase the tapestry of a story or the information around it. And it can be a very democratic process. You move away from just the sole voice of the expert journalist opining on something to a much wider group of people who can be equally well informed. But the trolling and the online harassment and the misinformation and disinformation that has come through comments is also of enormous concern. And I think in 2016, The Guardian did an online sort of survey of its comments over the last 10 years. And it looked at 70 million comments that had been left on its website over that period of time. And, you know, some really startling things came out of that. One was that out of the 10 most abused writers, 8 were women and 2 were black men. This led us to really re-examine what we were doing with comments, how we were using them, the purpose of them for the organization, because we realized there was a reputational issue, there was a staff issue. And from about 2018 onwards, we started changing the way we did comments. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail at the end. Now, I've got slides and I'm going to talk to slides. Anyone who wants the slides, these can be made available. Right at the end of my slides, I've got some sections on a bit more about legal issues in different places, America, Europe, Australia, how hate speech works. But I'm not going to talk to those. I'm going to concentrate on the practicalities of things today. So I'm going to look at a little tiny bit on terminology, just so that we're all clear on what we're talking about. And then I'm going to look very briefly at legal liability, but you need to look at legal liability because that has to inform how you're looking at moderating your comments. And then we'll look at some of the different models that there are around. And then I'll finish with a little bit about The Guardian. So in terms of terminology, people talk about comments in various different ways. They use the term below the line comments, user-generated comments, third-party comments. There can also be comments where, for example, The Guardian has a Facebook page and a YouTube channel, and we put our articles onto those pages. So they're hosted on a third-party site, but there are also comments below those articles. And so that's what we're talking about here. They can be people posting on sites, but they're essentially not things that the organization itself is directly looking at publishing and having its lawyers go through in the way that it does with articles above the line, if you like. So that's what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about anyway. So just moving on to sort of areas of legal liability. Again, very briefly, I'm not going to dwell on this in too much detail, but it is important because it underpins the issues that people need to be thinking about when they're looking at how they're going to moderate things. So the first thing to think about and remember is that these things are global. It's very easy to think, well, I'm an organization in Montenegro or in the UK, and that's where my audience is. But the reality is, with the internet and the web, anyone can be downloaded and read anywhere in the world. So there's a global issue here. And, you know, as a lawyer, I can't possibly know the law in every country in the world, much as I think as lawyers do, that I can be across it. I can't. So you have to be aware that there's a risk. And sometimes you have to therefore think, if I'm publishing an article that is focusing on a particular country, I need to maybe be thinking about who's going to be commenting on that article. It may attract people from a particular country. There may be a level of debate that's different to how it would be if it was just in the UK. So there are these considerations just because of the global nature of where things can be read and seen. The second thing I think to remember is that as a publisher, The Guardian, for example, is liable for what we publish, but we're also liable for what we publish on our site. And although there are nuances around, for example, as we'll see in a minute, particularly the US, I think if you start from a perspective that you are going to be liable, morally, legally, however you like to put it, for what you publish, and that includes the comments that you allow to be put below articles, there's lots of argument around that, but if you start from that premise, it's a pretty sensible place to start, because that then informs how you look at this. You look at this holistically as a whole thing. And, you know, you can be liable for all sorts of things. You can particularly be liable these days for hate speech. And I think that, sorry, you can particularly be liable for hate speech. And hate speech is pretty much what we lawyers would call strict liability. There's no defenses. If you put it up, it's unlawful and you have to take it down, but you shouldn't have put it up in the first place. Hate speech is a particularly difficult topic because the definition of it is very unclear and it varies from country to country. Some countries use it politically to exercise political control against opponents. In other cases, it's a sort of historic issue around Holocaust denying, for example, genocide. There are all sorts of sensitivities. But in most countries, hate speech is a crime. And globally, it's a crime. And then you've got issues that may be more common day-to-day ones around defamation. If you allow people to publish slurs about people, then if people are putting comments of that sort of nature, there's a potential defamation risk. Ditto with privacy. You mentioned, Doug mentioned in his opening about the publication of personal details about people and their health. That's clearly private information. If you were a publisher above the line, you would be thinking about what you were doing there. People don't always appreciate the consequences of publishing their own data, let alone their families or friends' data. There are copyright issues. Copyright's a particularly complicated area these days on the internet with regards to the status of hyperlinking to things. Users put lots of links into things. So there's potential copyright issues. And this is the last bullet point on this slide is more really a UK related issue. I don't know the extent to which it occurs in other countries, and it may be something that Miller's going to be able to talk about. But in the UK, we have quite a lot of control from courts around what you can say about ongoing court cases. And again, as newspaper lawyers, we know about these things, but the general public may not be so familiar with what they can and can't say about things. And so that sort of thing can also be published. So there's quite a lot of sort of scope for legal issues around comments that people post. And then I just wanted to add a short bit about the jurisdictional differences that inform different approaches to moderation. So in the US, for example, where because of the First Amendment, there's very high speech protection, it starts from a very high premise. The Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, a very strange title, but it effectively gives complete immunity to below the line comments. And not only does it give complete immunity, but it allows a certain level of intervention by a publisher or editor in those comments and still maintaining immunity. And that's what they call the sort of Good Samaritan doctrine, is how that's been described. And that effectively came from a good starting point, which was that it allowed people to intervene in comments and moderate them without the risk of being liable. So the idea was that it encouraged people to go in to the comments and manage them. But the reality is that where that's left things is that they've, people just let any sort of comments run in the States. And if you go on to comment discussions even on sort of fairly reputable newspapers in the States, some of them are pretty unpleasant. And it's really because of Section 230, and Section 230 has come back into the spotlight in the States. They're looking at it again. You compare that to Europe, where we have a much more nuanced approach to these things, and we balance rights much more. So Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights, those are both the articles that respect freedom of expression, but they're also both qualified rights. They're not absolute rights. They're qualified by all sorts of things. And in a way, that more nuanced approach is reflected in the e-commerce directive, which is what rules over Europe in a lot of places in terms of how they look at liability on comments. And that can range from immunity for what you would call a conduit, just a straight line that's not, you know, it's almost, in my mind, just like a cable that is, things are running along and they go from A to B, through to people who are hosting comments. And it looks, again, in a nuanced way about where liability might lie. I think also the other thing to remember throughout this is that in all these countries, hate speech, however you define it, is unlawful. And there have been some cases from Europe which have basically said, it doesn't matter if as soon as you knew about it, you took it down. They say you should have taken it down before you even let it up. And, you know, we all know in practice that's almost impossible to do. But that's where it is. And a lot of the way that the legal liability issues look at these things is against this active versus passive publishing. And one hopes in a way that in terms of legal liability, you get to a place where for comments below the line, it should be a notice and take down type thing, that, you know, when you know about things, you act quickly and you take things down. But the reality is we're not there yet, and certainly not in any sort of level of consistency. So that's all I was going to say on the jurisdictional issues. So I'm now going to look at some of the different approaches that there are to managing comments and moderating models, if you like. And I mean, none of this is rocket science. You'll all sort of be able to work this out for yourself. But the real dilemma is, do you moderate or don't you? Because if you don't have a model like the US, where the Good Samaritan intervention is not protected, if you start moderating, you're starting to engage, you're starting to control. And in a lot of places, they'll see that as meaning that you should be legally liable for what's involved. So there's a view that if you don't moderate at all, you stay well away from it, that then you can have immunity. But that means that, you know, you're letting things go that maybe you don't want to let go. So you're looking at a variety of things, from no moderating, pre-moderating, post-moderating, or mixtures of those things. And there are pros and cons in that. If you moderate, you have editorial control. And that gives you a level of integrity. You can reflect the values of the organization if you're doing your pre-moderation. You can only let comments through that you agree with. You can do whatever you like, but it's extraordinarily heavy on resources. And certainly it's one of the things that's informed some of the decisions the Guardian's made about how it moderates. And if you have moderators, you need to have training, because you need to have consistency. So you need people to be making the same decisions on the same information. You need to make sure you've got probably round the clock moderating. The Guardian has the advantage of that we've got bases in Australia and the US, both on the east and west coast. So we can have people who are up in their normal time zone who can look at these things. You've got issues of censorship or free speech. If you over moderate, then you're going to possibly be accused of censorship, because effectively you're not letting through lawful comment. And then you've got issues about accountability and who the moderator is and what standards you moderate to. So there are lots of pros and cons that that have to be put into the mix, and that people have to look at those and decide where they feel most comfortable. And just starting with some of the sorry, we go back to that one. In terms of unmoderated, as I say, everything goes up straight away. There's no sift. You may have, in some instances, in an unmoderated system, some sort of spam filter. You may have some sort of hate speech filter that tries to knock out automatically certain keywords. There are issues with automated, which I'll touch on in a bit. In a lot of jurisdictions, if you don't moderate, you can say, well, we're effectively a conduit here. We're not involved in this at all. We're not an editor or an author or a publisher. So some people like this because they think it gives them high levels of legal protection. You don't need to invest resources. It's much cheaper. It's much quicker. And in reality, a lot of claims and complaints about comments are resolved simply by taking things down. So you may say that proportionately, unmoderating is a good way forward. There are disadvantages to it, however. There's a lack of editorial integrity that comes with unmoderated comments. How do you manage things so that you create a place where people have a community sense? How do you make sure that people aren't trolling or harassing or abusing? The legal position is by no means clear, as I've said. And there is definitely the law in a lot of countries is moving to a place where it says, if you choose to put something up that you know is controversial and you open comments on it, that of itself is going to make you liable legally for them because you've chosen to do that. And as I've also said, there are hate speech risks. You can spam and filter quite a lot of stuff, but you can never get everything. And I think, yeah, I'll move on to, so pre-moderated is basically where you don't let anything out into the public domain without having checked it through first. That gives you a much greater level of control over, avoiding abuse, and, as people say, a cleaner site. Much less likely that you're going to have things that are problematic, and you can do it all in accordance with standards that you want to set. But it's enormously resource intensive. It may take days if you looked at every comment before any comment ever made it up into the limelight at all. You need an enormous amount of training, and for most people, it's just not practical. It's just too risky, and you still have the risk that if someone lets something through that shouldn't have been let through, that you've got a liability straight away. And there is a sense also from people, because it's generally not a transparent process. I mean, there was a lot of discussion around what Facebook were doing and what controls they were using, that you're censoring comment. So pre-moderation has its ups and downs as well. Post-moderation, I've asked the question at the top of this slide: is it the worst of all worlds or a sensible compromise? You get a bit of both, and you get the advantage of things going up quickly. Hopefully, if you're looking at things and your moderators are doing a job, they can spot problems early and take them down. Again, as I said, quite often a lot of complaints are dealt with by prompt takedowns. So if you're looking at risk and proportionality, you can deal with things quite quickly. And sorry, let's go back to, and there are, again, there are problems with post-moderation from the legal liability perspective, because there is still a view that if you're editorially engaged and looking at things, then you're going to be effectively in control of them and therefore should be liable. And there are concerns that post-moderation really doesn't manage to get into everything in the way that it should. And again, it creates practical problems around liability, which is why I sort of think that you don't want to get too bogged down in thinking, well, am I going to be legally liable or not? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. I think if you start from the perspective that if you're a publisher and you've got comments below the line on your articles, you should accept responsibility for those and then move forward from there in terms of how you're going to deal with things. Now, there are hybrids. So you can have a mixture of these things. You can say for some things, if you've got a recipe or a travel blog, that's going to be pretty low risk. So you could put all the comments on there in an unmoderated way and not really worry about them too much. And that has an advantage of, better for speech. It frees moderators up to deal with riskier areas. And in most systems, you could switch an unmoderated thread to being moderated if there was a problem that had suddenly come up that no one had spotted. And then you have pre-moderation for very risky things, and you do a bit of post-moderation as well with other things. So that none of these things are of themselves a single model. There are hybrid versions of all of them that you can put together. I put this slide up because I think it is quite interesting. The end of this process is, what do you do about complaints? Apologies. And what some people do is they try to avoid complaints by having filters that just are anticipatory and take things down before they've even got started. Most people will be looking at some sort of notice and takedown process. Just bear with me for 2 ticks. I'm going to just put my mic on mute, and if I can, and get myself in.
Jill, do you mind if I interrupt for a second? I think we're having trouble with the translation. For some reason, the connection on the interpreter side has cut out. If we could take a second to try to resolve that so that we can make sure we hear Vesna and Vlado, that would be really helpful. I apologize. Okay, now I hear Vesna fine. I think it's more Vlado that is the problem. For some reason, his connection wasn't working. Vesna, can you just repeat after me or just translate me? Maria, can you just confirm on chat that you're able to hear? Vesna? Vesna, can you go ahead and translate for me right now? Just do what I'm saying. And if someone could let me know in the chat function if this is working, that'd be great. Okay, you can hear me? And Mario, you're hearing Vesna now, because I hear her when I do French and mute original audio, I hear Vesna just fine. Mario, can you just let me know? Okay, I hear just fine on my French line. If I hit French and then mute original audio, I hear only Vesna. I can hear in the background slightly the original the original speech, but it's, as if I'm in, a room listening. I don't hear a problem. Olivera, can you maybe, okay, great. Everyone seems to hear it now. I'm going to go ahead and have Jill, please go ahead and resume. There, go ahead and resume, Jill, sorry.
Lovely. Can you all hear me, and can you still see the slides?
Yes.
Excellent.
I apologize to everyone. The translation seems to be a problem. It seems to be largely to do with connections of the translators coming in, and then just us trying to hear them. I apologize for that. I think it's just a Zoom problem that we can't, and a connection problem we can't get around on that end. But if you do select French and mute original audio, when I was just listening to Vesna, I could hear her fine. So try that. Thank you. Go ahead, Jill.
Okay. It's given me a chance to get a glass of water as well, so that's much appreciated. So I was just going to say that there are various different approaches to managing complaints as well that again feed into the model of moderating that maybe people are looking at. And some people will have sort of a very heavy filter system, so they try and avoid getting any, allowing any comment out at all that is going to be potentially problematic. Most people operate, or will be looking to operate, some sort of notice and takedown, so that as soon as you get notice, you respond and you take stuff down. That of itself has nuanced differences, because if you get a complaint, it doesn't necessarily mean that something is illegal or is unlawful. But there is then an issue about whether you, as the non-publisher but hoster of the material, take the time to investigate, or whether you just take things down. And a lot of regimes look at obligations to remove unlawful content, but of course that may need to be determined by a court before it can be said to be unlawful. Another process that some people adopt is what they call notice and notice. So when you get a complaint, you go to the person who put the comment up and you alert them and you discuss with them and see what their view of things is. That's obviously a much more consensual way and feels less censorious. There's a notice and graduated response, which really looks at repeated infringers. You have a series of escalating sanctions which progress, and in some cases you may block or terminate the service. You may put people on pre-moderation if you think that that's appropriate. There are filtering and monitoring processes that can be done to identify particularly repetitive things. So once you've become aware of a particular route, you can use technical methods to try to manage that. And at the bottom, I put sort of voluntary measures, because in a way, this is the use of terms of service, whereby you create your own system, and that includes how you look at things that in terms of your own internal resources and what you do with it. But in your terms of service allow you to say what you will and won't tolerate, and what you will and won't put up, and how you'll behave and how you expect people to behave. And again, there's been an awful lot of discussion recently around Facebook and Twitter and using their terms of service. Now, some people don't like this because they feel that it's the deferral of responsibility onto these private organizations. But when you're a publisher, if you're worrying about what you're letting out, having your own terms of service and a voluntary code of conduct effectively can be really important. And in a way, that takes me on to the final bit of the talk, which is just how the Guardian is doing things at the moment. And as I said, the way we do things now has been informed really by the outcome of the Web We Are investigation that we did back in 2016. And we've changed what we do and how we do it in the last 2 to 3 years. And we've certainly got to a place where we think less is best. So there was a sort of rush in the early days to have comments open on every single article. And we don't do that anymore. And if we've got several articles on the same topic, we'll open comments on one, and we'll choose which one to do. We also have recognized that we don't want nasty comments and we don't want abuse. What we want is things that contribute to the debate and to knowledge. And so we recognize that we need to have, this is part of the overall Gardijan site. And we want comments to be consistent with our values and contribute to the debate. So we have terms of reference, we have community standards, we have a set of 10 community standards that are quite straightforward. They sort of say things like, let me just find. So they say there are 10 simple guidelines which we expect all participants in the community areas of the Gardijan website to abide by. And they start off with, we welcome debate and dissent, but personal attacks against authors or other users, persistent trolling and mindless abuse will not be tolerated. They also include things like we manage what we call off-topic and on-topic. So one of the things that we say to people is that they have to stay on topic and they can't go off onto other irrelevant things. That allows us to manage the content, but also it stops people sometimes, you know, if they want to publish stuff on a particular article that comments aren't open on, people try and find other articles and just start posting them. And what this allows us to do is we can then manage ourselves. We say, this doesn't adhere to our own standards. And so it doesn't matter that you might be able to say this on another site or somewhere else. You're not going to be able to say it here. And so we have those 10 basic standards. And then we have a lot of detailed information that we try to give people to explain why we're doing things. We have a registration sign-up process with an email validation process, just so that we try, it's never possible to stop people opening endless new email accounts when you block one. But by having the email validation process, that allows us to have a certain degree of control over the commenters. Everybody has to have a username. As I say, we look very carefully at which articles we open comments on, and we don't open up comments on everything by any means. We've also now encourage the author of the article above the line to be actively involved in the below the line discussion, because that helps it keep its direction. Commenters appreciate it. It works well as a community exercise. We have a trained moderation team. As I say, we've got the advantage because we've got offices in Australia and on both sides of the US, that we can run a 24-hour set. We also identify the more and the less legally problematic, and possibly even if not legally problematic, areas where we think there will be high levels of comments. And moderators look specifically and scrutinize those comments. There may be other threads where they are just doing a more random checkup from time to time. We don't pre-moderate much at all. Most of what we do is post-moderation. We have report abuse and other reporting tools. And one of the deals with being a commentator on the Gardijan site is that you also self-police. So we look to the community to also tell us if they think things are wrong or abusive or publishing personal data, and that works very well. And we have we do have a dedicated lawyer for our community team to access if they have any particular concerns. It doesn't happen that often, and one of the big difficulties, I think, is the nuanced one around the difference between comment and statements of fact. If people are commenting and making value judgments, they can get away with quite a lot that people may find offensive. But if it's comment, it's all right. If it's a statement of fact, it may be more problematic. And that really requires quite a level of thought from the moderator. We have a very quick response as far as we can to complaints. So we do escalate things pretty quickly and look at them and take decisions on them. We don't edit comments. So if there is, quite often, people will post quite a long comment that may have in it some tiny bit that's problematic, but we're not going to go and take that out and say the rest of it's all right. Again, that's too time intensive for us to do, and starts meaning that we're editing people's remarks, a bit like the letters page might do. And we have an escalating process of dealing with people that we identify as problematic, from placing them on pre-moderation to removing or hiding their comments to ultimately banning users. So look, that I've taken a little more time, but we did have a little interruption. So I'm going to stop there. As I say, on the slides, and these can be made available, I'm sure Doug can circulate them as people want. I've also put in at the end a series of just short notes on different jurisdictional approaches to legal liability. But this is a practical seminar, and so I'm stopping on that one. So Doug, back to you. Yes. I'm going to stop screen sharing and show my face, and I'm probably going to take my headphones off now and talk to the computer microphone.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Again, everyone, apologies for the interpretation issue. We've already been chatting, and what we will do is edit and subtitle this into Montenegrin when we put it onto YouTube. So we'll send it around to everyone, so you will be able to see it with the appropriate interpretation subtitle. And I think that will be really useful. It has been a series of Zoom internal problems plus some connection issues that we've had, but we'll see. We'll get through it by subtitling. We've had a question that I think is a really good one, and it was one actually, Jill, that I already had. I really enjoyed how you went through the different possibilities, the pre-moderation, the moderation. You talked about flagging, the ability for users to flag comments and things like that. I thought that was all really useful. It showed the kind of toolkit that people have at their disposal and that they can choose from. And often that choice is based on resources they have available. They can't pick the perfect solution. Someone asked if, how does the Guardian deal with comments, or does it deal with comments on social media platforms? So let's say I'm on Facebook and I like the Guardian, and therefore every once in a while an Guardian article comes into my Facebook feed, and then Facebook users start outside of the Guardian platform commenting on things. Is there and do you feel that there's some sort of a responsibility you have? And B, how do you address it if you do feel some responsibility for it?
Yeah, I mean, it in a way, this is, and I'm hoping you can hear me clearly enough on the computer mic now. I mean, this is the question of the moment, partly because of a case in Australia called Voller, where exactly this point has come up, and various Australian newspapers and news organisations are at risk of being found to be liable for defamatory comments on their Facebook pages. Now, the traditional approach to this was, I guess, the classic, it's not on our site, it's on Facebook, it's nothing to do with us, it's a problem for Facebook. And Facebook that would then say, we're America, we can avail ourselves of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, not our problem either. And so you were left with a void, really, that everybody was saying, not my problem, go away, too difficult. When we started looking at it, we said, well, okay, we may not be liable as a primary publisher, if you like, as the first port of call, but probably if we start knowing about these things, we have got a liability legally. And then we were saying, well, if we have a set of terms of reference on our own site that manage how we want to behave and we want our commenters to behave, why would we not have that on a third-party site? The answer is that obviously, it's harder to manage. It's much more resource intense. And I think that there isn't an easy answer. What we do now is two things, really, Doug, to your question. One is that we look quite carefully at what articles we put on Facebook. And we try to avoid putting highly controversial articles there without taking on board the fact that there may be issues arising. And the second thing is that we're very responsive to complaints. So either through us or through Facebook, we hope that we get to know about problems and that we can get in there and sort them out. Now there are a limited number of range of tools that you can have with Facebook. You can close comments down. So this is an evolving area, and this is an area where people are still talking to the social media providers, to Facebook and Twitter, about where the balance lies in this thing. And I mean, I know from the Guardian's perspective, our YouTube channel drives a lot of traffic. It's very important to us, but we don't manage the comments below the line in the way that we would on our own site.
Thanks very much for that, Jill. I have a couple more questions, and please do let us know. Do you have to leave at 11 sharp?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. The joy of having this on my screen is I can't see my emails. So,
well, that's great. We'll protect you for a while. No, we'll just continue to go, and then I want to make sure I give Mila a chance to talk. So maybe we'll go for an extra, 10 minutes or so past what we thought about, because people are asking really specific questions, which I think will help them to make some determinations under some legal provisions in Montenegro. And I think that's really important. So I have Jadranka here who says, thank you for the excellent presentation. As we are in the final stage before the adoption of the new media law, one question, and I assume this is Montenegro, but someone please let me know if that's wrong, because we do have some other participants. As we're in the final stages before the adoption of a new media law, one question has emerged and been debated as it is expected to be a concrete legal provision. Namely, what is normally the time for taking down the unlawful comment after you receive the complaint or notification? So what is considered generally reasonable? And she says 60 minutes, 24 hours, 48 hours, just some sort of general thoughts on that.
Well, I think, the starting point is probably that if it's hate speech and it's unlawful, then there is no time. It should never have gone up. The reality is, and if you look at the Delphi case in the European Court of Human Rights, Delphi, when they knew about the comments, took them down, but the European Court said it's too late. You shouldn't have put them up. So high-end hate speech, unlawful speech, there is no reasonable time to take down. That's the legal position. The practical position is that you have to do things as quickly as you can. And there are discussions going on. I think in Europe or France, I was reading somewhere where they were talking about you've got to do things within 60 minutes. I think in Germany, under the law that they brought in, I think in the case of high-end concern, you have to do it in 24 hours. Otherwise, you have 7 days. So, reasonableness is a moving feast. And really what you need to make sure, I think, if you want to have a responsible approach to these things, is that the communication channels that people have access to complain to you are very transparent, easy to use, properly monitored, and that you then have a quick response and escalation team, whether you're triaging so that someone's initially looking and going, oh, okay, that's an accuracy thing, I don't need to worry too much about it, we can sort it. or, oh goodness, this is a really serious legal issue, I need to escalate this up to the lawyer to look at. Or some people would just say, any sort of complaint, we're going to take the comment down because we don't have the resources to investigate and decide whether we should be defending it. So there's an approach there, as well as a sort of, you know, an ethical backdrop to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think a part of that question would depend upon whether or not, or the answer that would depend upon whether or not that comment was flagged by a user, because, you know, under most legal provisions that exist, you know, having knowledge of something makes you much more responsible for it. And it also shows, you know, often in broadcast legislation or print, you know, regulation, things like that, this issue of responding to user complaints and building some sort of a mixed system that is very responsive to user needs, because then you're allowing the public to actually determine what they see as unreasonable, and they also help you police it without using your own resources. So that is something that at a minimum, I think that even small organizations can consider is making sure, if you are doing moderation, that you have some ability for things to be flagged or brought to the editor's attention.
I mean, I don't know if other people have, you know, occasionally we've, I mean, not in this direct context, but occasionally we've had need to go to other websites that have maybe picked up a story of ours that we know is wrong. And so you're trying to say to them, I think you should take this down because we've got problems with it. If finding people to contact, you know, you go onto websites and you look and you go, well, there's no contact details. I don't even know which country some of these websites are in. You know, some of that may be deliberate, but if you're wanting to be responsible, I think, you know, having a really easy, here's our complaint route, email us, here's the phone number, whatever route you want to, or a form, it doesn't matter, but that's really key, because I think that then shows, you know, externally that this is something you want to engage with and that you're trying to get right.
Someone has a question also: how many people, which may, you know, generally, if you can estimate, are involved in managing comments for The Guardian, and are they trained in some way before they start their job?
I have no idea what the total numbers are. I can try and find out, and I'll feed that back to you. Yes, they're trained. They have a set of standards that they adhere to. And they're you know, a very mixed group of people, which is, you know, part of the essence. You don't want your moderators to be the censor in chief. So they need to have an appreciation of the ethics of the organization and those sorts of things. But you don't want to have, I mean, again, The Guardian, you know, very helpfully in those ways that we all love each other, leaked all those Facebook internal guidance for their moderators, and you go, blimey, it's an extraordinarily complicated area. And you know, whether someone is, and the advantage of human interaction as opposed to automation is, at least you hope that a human can pick up on a nuance and a context. So, you know, whether you've got an ISIS video that's a part of a news report as opposed to a propaganda terrorist exercise, or nude in art as opposed to pornography, you know, the moderators can offer a really important and it allows speech and images and information to remain up that otherwise might come down. So, you know, yes, we have a big team. They operate around the world, and you know, some of them may do just 2 hours in Australia looking at particular things. But the key is that you have consistency as well. So you do need to have a set of standards that you train to.
Thanks very much. Yeah, and The Guardian is, I think, you know, just as a reader, you know, is one of the most global organizations that exists, and has taken a very active, intentional, it seems, you know, global approach. So you're going to have a bigger moderation issue than you know, something that just has a Montenegrin audience in mind or something like that. So I would assume
you have to reflect your culture. I mean, we did have, you know, there were big discussions initially about, you know, the American end of the organization was saying, well, well, why are you moderating our comments? You know, we're immune. And you go, yeah, but this is a reputational issue. This is about who we are and what we want to be. So we can choose. We can choose that. That's the great thing about it.
I mean, that's a really good point, is that often you see publications choosing something for completely it's not a legal reason. If you look at the United States, and I'm American, you can see, you know, very respectable publications choosing very different ideas, and some of them don't welcome comments really at all. Some of them let it be a complete free-for-all, and then some do some moderation, and it seems to be based on what they would like their comment sections to look like, as opposed to any sort of response of a legal nature or trying to fit into some sort of a legal framework. And those similar choices could be made in Montenegro. I mean, you may feel it's generally nice to have give users the chance to comment, but if the comments aren't leading to anything that is interesting, it's just a source of vitriol and hate speech and these kinds of things, then, you know, an American publication would maybe just decide not to allow them. But that's not a legal censorship. That's a commercial choice.
Yeah, yeah. You know, that's why I sort of say it's a bit too easy just to say what's the legal position, because it's a much bigger and more important thing than what the legal position is. And in a way, I sort of want, when I talk to my lot, when they're discussing, I sort of say, park what the legal position is. As I say, you know, let's assume we're liable for this. We're responsible for it ethically and morally, even if we're not legally liable. Let's start from that premise. Where do we go from there, and how do we manage that going forward?
Yes, absolutely. Can I ask a question? How do you mentioned the 10 points for the editorial, you know, the guidance for commenting, and these are for users, to, you know, people who are potentially going to post. How do they see that, you know, that list of rules? Are they required to register and sign up to it, or how do they actually interact with that? Because I think that will help these Montenegrin publications to figure out, you know, how far do they have to go to develop rules, to inform the public about them, you know, what is the best practice and what are their options?
So, as I said, with the Guardian site now, and particularly if you want to comment, you've got to sign up and you've got to register. And when you sign up and register, you agree to comply with the standards. You know, if you don't want to comply with our standards, you can go and comment somewhere else. There's loads of other places. But so you agree to comply with those sort of things. And you know, that's the advantage. That is this voluntary contract that you make, which means that you can say, well, yes, you may be able to say that on that site, but we're not going to allow it here. So, and if you go on to the Guardian homepage, at the bottom, there are a series of you know, how to contact us, how to make complaints. There's a privacy policy, and there are also our terms and conditions, and all of that. The community standards is all accessible through that. So it's quite transparent and relatively easy for people to see. I mean, one of the things we have increasingly an issue with at the moment is people regretting comments that they've made. So they want them taken down, or they want them anonymized. And of course that's quite complicated, because if you take down a comment, quite often there's a thread attached to it. So, you know, you take that, you take the whole thing down. What do you do with it? How do you anonymize people? You know, there's endless new problems that you hadn't anticipated, that you're constantly having to look at and try and come up with solutions. But yeah, you know, I think having a set of terms that are transparent, again, that people know what they are, and you're doing, as lawyers would say, entering into a contract here. I give you this, you give me that, and we go forward to this in a mutual way.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Sergey, who I know is a local lawyer, who's interested in these issues. He says it's often hard to, you know, as a lawyer or a media outlet, to make the distinction between hate speech and legitimate political debate. And he asks if you have some guidance. I know it's a touchy issue and it's a difficult one, but if any thoughts you could provide would be really nice.
I really don't have any guidance other than you have to look really closely at context. And as I said, we have, the moderators can escalate things to a lawyer in certain situations. And then quite often there will be a discussion between, more than one person. It's one of those things that collaboratively quite often is, you're looking at context, you're looking at, again, if you're looking in American terms, what's the Brandenburg test, an imminent threat of violence? If someone is inciting violence, inciting hatred. But I think that one of the ways that we sort of try to sidestep round that is that, if I can find the wording, we say we will not tolerate racism, sexism, homophobia, or other forms of hate speech or contributions that could be interpreted as such. So we try to give ourselves a little bit of wriggle room around could be, which because some people are going to say, well, it isn't, you're wrong. And we go, well, this is our interpretation. So, we give ourselves the power to say, you may disagree, but we think it could be. And I think there's a couple of other bits where we try to sort of allow for that little bit of, so we're not saying it is or it isn't. We're saying it could be perceived as. And, that's also the test of a lot of discrimination around, certainly the UK test on discrimination is quite often what's in the eyes of the beholder. The beholder may be oversensitive, but you've still got to take that into account. So again, I think if looking at the terms can help you do that. And another way that it comes up is sometimes we get threats to the moderators. The moderators get people saying, you took my comment down and I'm going to come and get you. I know where you live. And you're looking at those again saying, what is, okay, this is very nasty, but is it an immediate threat? It's all about context and nuance and trying to make a judgment call. And that's not a perfect process.
Thanks for that. I have a follow-up to that. We find in America that often these things, we were talking about discrimination or hate speech, are really litigated in public, not in court. And what happens is you find, either special interest groups or, other media organizations, they start to raise this in the public discussion to where the media outlet eventually feels it either needs to stand by the publication or apologize for it or remove the comment based on public pressure and often advertising pressure, and nothing to do with its commercial decision once again. So there is an awareness element to this as well. If there's a publication that is particularly problematic and raising hate speech, then public pressure and other media organizations talking about the issue can help to assuage that. And that goes to another question someone asked, there's a European directive on from the European Commission on disinformation, and platforms are supposed to adhere to them. And she's asking, what can journalists do? I would assume the answer is just raise attention to it and talk about it, because these are big organizations that move slowly, but without the awareness and without them knowing it's an issue publicly and locally, they're not going to probably act that much on it. I have one more question, which is, you mentioned that sometimes you do not allow comments to be open. Can you give me an example of when the Guardian makes decisions like that? Is it because it might be highly controversial, or just because it's maybe not important? Do you have any examples of that?
Well, in a very particular UK context, which again may not be relevant, but we have some very strict court reporting laws around ongoing court cases, active court cases. So we have a pretty blanket rule that says where there is an ongoing active court case, and that starts from when someone's arrested, we're not going to allow comments under articles about those stories until after conviction. Now, that's a pretty much blanket rule. because of the way our contempt laws are. When we were doing, when there have been particularly controversial, high profile court cases, say involving a politician or something of enormous public interest, we have taken a decision to open comments on one piece, and they are very carefully looked at. We still post moderate, but they're looked at by a lawyer and a moderator, because they can manage that in that process. So there's that side of things. There's, if you know that someone is writing something, I mean, a particularly difficult area is writing about trans issues. It's a very difficult area for the Guardian at the moment, as it is for a number of organizations. And you get all sorts of difficult comments on those. I think that, you wouldn't want to put that article onto Facebook where you couldn't manage the comments. You might want to give very careful consideration to how you moderated comments on it on your own site. If we've lawyered an article, for example, when we were doing the Panama Papers or the Paradise Papers, those, we spent quite a lot of time very carefully lawyering stories. And because there's a lot of nuance around it, you don't want to really then open comments and let the Wild West come in and possibly go into the areas that you very carefully try to avoid it above the line. So, there are those sort of decisions that are taken around what is put where, and whether you open comments or don't open comments on them.
Thank you very much, Jill. Olivera, do you have any comments or questions that came in for one final question in Montenegrin? Because I can only read the ones on the Q&A that are in English. If you have any, please let me know. Otherwise, we will go ahead and go over to Mila. And Mila, we just checked, and I think you can unmute your microphone. So please do unmute. There you are. You're here. So Jill, I will let you go. We have really appreciated this. We've learned a lot, and I think that it is instructive to kind of see the nuanced and almost rather subjective approach we've had to take as an organization to figure out how to respond to this. And you will be subtitling it and putting it out there for other people. You're welcome, Jill, to stick around. Mila's going to speak, but if you have to go, I totally understand.
No. I'm gonna stay online and listen to Mila, because I'm always very interested to see how people are doing these things on the ground. We do things this way in the Guardian way from the UK perspective, but there's lots of others. No rights and wrongs.
I'm looking and I'm not seeing the translators there. Olivera, do you see translators? Did we lose them? We seem to be having some local connection issues. So Jill, you may not be able to understand Mila, because Mila, I think you're going to speak in Montenegrin. And I have lost Vesna, the translator. Mila, can you just answer and let me know you're speaking in Montenegrin, correct?
Yes, I can try in English, but I'm not good.
Okay, great. I mean, maybe the best thing to do, Mila, is to start by, so that we can bring Jill into this, and then you can go ahead and speak in Montenegrin, it's fine. Mila, maybe if you have any specific questions to ask Jill in English, that would be great. And otherwise, we'll let you just speak for about 10 minutes or so in Montenegrin before we wrap up. I apologize for the translation issue. It seems like the translators are having a connection problem where they're located.
I would like to hear something more about articles which are not open for comments. I didn't understand because I have problem with translators. Is it when some people was arrested? Guardian does not publish articles which said that some people was arrested because they're afraid about lawyers. Is it correct or no?
I was wondering if it's limited to court issues or legal issues that can't be discussed.
I can hear nothing.
Okay.
Unmute.
Yeah, yes.
There you go. Great.
It's a very particular UK issue. We have very strange laws around what you're allowed to report where there are ongoing court cases. It's called a strict liability law around this area. So once someone is arrested, as in by the police, up until and after the trial, then we generally do not allow comments on articles about those cases. Because while the lawyers and the publishers understand the law and can work around that, a lot of the members of the public don't understand it. So we're looking to avoid comments from people saying, they're as guilty as hell, I saw them do it, whatever it may be. It's a very tricky area.
Can you please explain, if you hear me, which persons is in media charged for moderating comments? Is it lawyers or journalists or some other persons?
We have journalists doing it. Lawyers are there to help and to advise, but not to make decisions. Ultimately, any decisions of this sort will be done by editorial people, and we have a moderating team, and they are part of the Guardian. There's a community team in the Guardian that they're part of, who look at this sort of interface.
Yes, thank you. And what would you? Can you say for Montenegro, we haven't a law. Our media law does not does not have article about these things. We just have some practice from Europe Court of Justice or some practice from European Union. How we can do this thing? Do we have made some special law, or we can practice just something like Gardijan?
I mean, as I say, for me, the starting point should be, there are no straightforward, easy answers to when you are going to be liable for comments. Different countries take different views on that. It's far easier to start from the premise that you assume you are liable, and you then operate a system that says, okay, assuming that we are liable, what sort of comments are we going to allow? How are we going to manage it? If you want to try to avoid liability, then the real simple answer, and certain organizations have done this, is you don't have any comments because it's too complicated. And the last thing you really want to do is spend a lot of time and money arguing over that sort of thing, when, as a publisher at any rate, you want to be spending your money on your publishing. So the comments are a really important part of that, but there's also a proportionality risk assessment that I think you do when it comes to these things. So the fact that there's no law straightforwardly dealing with this, I wouldn't get too worried about. I just think in Europe, we know what the European Court of Human Rights has said in Delphi and in a couple of other cases. There's a Phil in the Sweden case, and there's a Hungary case, where there are little nuances around these things. But people are looking. What no court likes is leaving people without a remedy. So the fact that the Guardian may say it's not our problem, it's Facebook's problem, and Facebook say, well, it's nothing to do with us, we're American. Courts don't like that, so they're going to look to make people responsible where they can find them. And if you're an organization in Montenegro and it's a Montenegrin court, you're an obvious target for it. So whether you look on yourself as a primary liability or a secondary liability once you have notice of things, I think I would just sort of, assume that and then look at being responsible around it.
Some media and some media owners have dilemma about responsibility for comments. In what cases media are responsible for comments? And is there some situation when media isn't responsible for comments?
Well,
media does not agree, sorry, about these things in Montenegro.
No. I mean, I think my last answer really is the same to this one. You can look on legal responsibility, or you can look on ethical, moral responsibility as an organisation, and there are different approaches. America's different to Europe, to Australia, and it's, you will in certain situations be held responsible for comments. That's the way it is.
Yeah,
I understand. Thank you.
Mila, did you have anything else you wanted to either ask Jill or to address to the audience? We still have, a lot of participants online, and I didn't know if this is a chance for you to reach out to some lawyers that we have online, and also some of your own members of your association, perhaps other journalists. So please feel free to say whatever you'd like. Maybe either ask Jill some more questions or take 3 to 5 minutes to address the audience.
I will say something, but on my language.
Please do. Please do.
Mi u principu u Crnoj Gori nismo rešili problem odgovornosti za objavljivanje komentara i pored toga što to nije zakonski regulisano, predviđeno je da u novom zakonu o medijima koji je u proceduri usvajanja bude uneta odredba koja obavezuje medije da u roku od 24 sata od prijavljivanja uklone neprimjerene komentare. Ne verujem da ćemo na ovaj način rešiti problem koji već ozbiljno postoji u Crnoj Gori, a to je da se portali i mediji koriste za vređanje ljudi, za širenje mržnje i za lične uvrede. Obzirom da se trenutno nalazimo u jednoj politički delikatnoj situaciji, bojim se da ćemo u narednom periodu, izvinjavam se, imati veoma ozbiljne probleme kada su u pitanju komentari na portalima, a da to ni na koji način nije regulisano, niti uglavnom mediji snose odgovornost za to. Pravila komentarisanja su takođe veoma uopštena, neprecizna, timovi za moderaciju gotovo da ne postoje, zato sam i pitala kakva je praksa i kakva je preporuka. To uglavnom rade novinari, to uglavnom novinari početnici koji nemaju nikakvo ili imaju veoma ograničeno i malo iskustvo i znanje u vezi sa ovim. Retko koji mediji, gotovo, koliko evo ja znam, samo jedan portal u Crnoj Gori je uveo praksu premoderiranja komentara nakon izbijanja pandemije, znači shvatili su veoma ozbiljno što sledi i šta bi moglo da se desi u narednom periodu. Nažalost, ovo se još uvijek ne doživljava kao ozbiljan problem i ne radi se na tome da se prosto stvari postave onako kako bi trebalo. U poslednje vreme imali smo nekoliko slučaja privođenja i pisanja prijava, procesuiranja osoba koje su... Da li me čujete? Ok. Imali smo znači slučajeve kada su ljudi privođeni u policiju zbog komentarisanja i zbog šerovanja određenih tekstova na društvenim mrežama. Tako da te stvari kad je u pitanju sloboda izražavanja i njena ograničenost u Crnoj Gori uopšte nisu postavljene kako treba, odnosno nismo dovoljno radili kako bi se te stvari unapredile i kako bismo ljude edukovali da znaju u kom pravcu bi trebalo da idemo. Znači, to je kod nas još uvijek polje koje se otvora, još uvijek lutamo i još uvijek se pozivamo na neku praksu koju, nažalost, ne umemo da primenjujemo. Tako da se nadam da ćemo u budućnosti, makar kad bude otvorena rasprava o novom zakonu o medijima, mnogo ozbiljnije shvatiti ove stvari i razmišljati o posljedicama koje donose i slobode izražavanja koju mi ovdje tretiramo kao apsolutno pravo i činjenica da se komentari na portalima koriste za širenje mržnje, ide se dotle čak da se ljudi lično vređaju, da se iznose neki njihovi lični podaci. Ja radim u jednom mediju gdje smo suočeni sa situacijom da govorimo o onome, naravno što ja znam, ne kažem da toga nema i u drugim medijima, da ljudi prestaju da daju izjave, intervjue, da neće da razgovaraju sa nama zato što su njihovi tekstovi na portalima onda vrlo neprimjereno korišćeni i dovedeni su u nezgodnu situaciju da moraju da trpe razne uvrede i ponižavanja zbog toga što mediji prosto nisu u stanju da se nose sa problemom neprimjerenih komentara.
Mila, can you just turn on your video?
Okay.
Thanks. Be nice for others to see you. I didn't want to interrupt.
I can't. Sorry.
Okay.
Stop it.
Okay. Seems like we're having a problem with. Yeah, you're allowed on my permissions, that you just must be having a problem on your end. Okay, well, thank you, Mila. That was, it was great to have you. I give your thoughts at the end after we've had, almost an hour and a half to discuss this important issue. I want to, and Mila, if you need to interject at all, please unmute yourself and either come on video or there you are, you're unmuted. If you have anything else you'd like to say, please, of course, do so. I apologize, everyone, for the chaotic interpretation issue. We had times when the translators could not connect at all. We had times when they could connect, but people couldn't hear them very well because of their connection. It was generally probably not very smooth for those who really relied on the Montenegrin. We will take care of that, however. What we will do is we will edit this to a basically the presentation that Jill gave plus the dialogue that happened towards the end involving me and Mila, where she was able to ask really important local questions, I think. And we were able to get the user questions and answers onto the screen or onto the audio for everyone to hear. We will subtitle all of that and we will put it onto YouTube and we will distribute to all of you a link to that so that you can follow it or maybe just go to parts that you might not have understood or might have been too technical for you because they're in English. Again, I apologize, but we are slightly at the mercy of what is allowed by Zoom and by internet connections. I will also, Jill, it's okay for me, I think you said to share your presentation, correct? Yeah, so several people in the Q&A asked for the presentation, the slides. Jill goes into also a little more of the legal background and cites some specific cases and things like that, which may be for lawyers or non-lawyers to look at, although she concentrated largely here on the practicalities, which is really good for the general audience we have. So it's almost 11:30. I want to say thank you very much, Jill. We are extremely appreciative of your time. We know you're very busy. We know that everyone is kind of working from home, particularly in the UK still. And we know that you probably have many calls and many things to do all day, and we're very grateful for your time. And I'm also grateful for Mila's continued support on these activities. And we will continue to try to have webinars, and we'll try to get to the bottom of the interpretation issue. We'll try to have them on more themes. And we'll always subtitle them and try to make them as available to the local audience as we can. So Mila, thank you for your time, and thank you to Olivera and the Montenegro Media Institute and to Media Center as well. And thank you also very much to the British Embassy in Podgorici, which has been very supportive of all of these types of activities, and is the UK government that's providing the funding for these activities. So thank you. I think we'll call it a day. Thanks. Thanks, Mila.
Thank you.
Thanks.